All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks everybody for joining us today here on our Prestosports webinar. My name is JD Fox. I'm the Director of Partnerships at Prestosports, and we're joined today by Justin Seipert, who's the Director of Multimedia at the Collegiate Water Polo Association, otherwise known as the CWPA. Does anybody say Collegiate Water Polo Association anymore, Justin, or does everybody just say CWPA?
We, in meetings, we found that it shortens our meetings by about 10 minutes if we just say CWPA. So we're phasing it out. So.
Awesome. So Justin's joining us today. We're talking about remote production and what it could mean for you for this upcoming fall, and some things that you may not have thought about with remote production. And obviously you guys have some different needs at the CWPA, Justin, and I know you kind of inherited this system, but I think it makes a lot of sense in that you wanted to add commentary to your water polo streams, but realized that given that water polo is happening all throughout the country, you didn't necessarily have experts on site that could provide that play-by-play for you.
Right. So we have around 300 teams across the country, and it is all the way across the country from coast to coast. And while having commentary is an excellent upgrade to a stream, it wasn't feasible to have an announcer at every location. It's hard enough to get equipment there set up and cameras and all that. So like you said, I kind of inherited this. JD, you were pretty integral in creating our workflow and all this with my predecessor, and I believe his predecessor before him. So now we have a setup. So we have our remote stream kits that are Pelican cases that we ship across the country, camera, encoder, tripod, everything that they need for on site. We hire a local camera operator. They set it up. They stream that footage back to us at our office or remotely at someone's home or whatever. We bring that stream in. We currently are using Wirecast, but we can bring that stream in, add announcing, add graphics, add a score bug, all that, and then we stream it all out live to our audience on our Presto portal at cwpatv.com. So it's a really, it allows us to really offer a great benefit to all of our athletes across the country, so that even if it started out as it was just a benefit that we offered to our students, so that friends and family could watch them even if they couldn't make it to the game. They could, if their student athlete is going to school hundreds of miles away, they can still watch them play. And as this situation develops now, it may be, we're still trying to figure out what else is going to happen, but it's possible that spectators may not be allowed inside a venue if there is a sporting event. So, what started out as just an added benefit to really, help enhance the experience for the student athletes, it now is kind of becoming essential in a lot of states, so that we can, so that anybody can watch the game, depending on what happens in the coming months.
Yeah. So basically, you're streaming the event twice. So there are some benefits to that. Obviously, adding things, you're adding a little bit of delay in the system. But to give people an idea of how it works is, you mentioned those streaming kits, and you just put an encoder on site. So you're just getting the pool footage and natural audio back, and you're streaming that back to us. And then we're having the announcers pull it off of our server, and they get it, and it's live to them. So anything they comment on will be in sync with the video that goes out. So that's one thing to keep in mind here. People are talking about with remote announcing, how does it keep in sync? Because as long as the source material is what they're commenting from, then everything will remain in sync. They add the graphics. And I think another key thing that, we don't want to gloss over here is the ability to add your commercials for your sponsors. You've got a couple major sponsors that help you with the coverage and help the CWPA in general, and getting them a little more love because you have a remote production and you have somebody who's in charge of making sure those spots run versus trying to have somebody on site try to do that for you that you're paying as a freelancer.
Right. So that allows us to have centralized control basically of what the content is, the quality of the feed, what graphics are incorporated, what spots are incorporated, and to have basically a schedule and accountability for the ads that we do run, we can then say, well, we ran your ad this many times, and we can tell you exactly how many people saw it. So, just from a metric standpoint, it's really useful to have those numbers to go forward.
And really, when it comes to this coming fall, you mentioned we'll talk in the water polo world for a minute, and then we'll branch out to the other sports and what this could mean. But for you guys and these big tournaments, and I don't know how familiar people are with water polo. You've got a lot of student athletes on the team. You've got a lot of people on the deck. Being able to have as minimal a staff on site, I think, based on you guys having this setup, it can only be a benefit to making sure some of these tournaments go.
Exactly.
And
yeah, I mean, go ahead, JD. Wait, was there more?
No, I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, we want to make sure that these games happen, and if we have abilities to limit the amount of technical staff we need on site, obviously that allows room for more competitors to be on the pool deck at once.
Exactly. From a technical standpoint, for us to do a stream, a technical staff in the pool area, we only need one person, and that is the camera operator. They can take the kit, set it up, and as long as nobody's within 6 feet of them, which they really shouldn't be anyway, that's their one-man show of just operating the camera, covering the action, and making sure the encoder's working and streaming, and then they're in contact via phone call or text with our announcers usually. So if there's feedback that needs to be given, if there's a problem, feed drops out, we let them know that and we work it out. But rather than having to have a full production crew on site to produce it, now with the streaming, there may be 3 to 10 people involved in the whole process, but they don't all have to be in the same space. Camera operator in the pool area, and then you have an announcer that is generally in our office but can do it from home too. As long as they have a computer that has the software and a good enough internet connection, they can do that from anywhere. And if we generally have a broadcast supervisor that's kind of QCing all of it, but they're remote. They don't have to be in the same place, because if you're calling play-by-play, you don't really want somebody tromping around the room with you and in your ear. So it's kind of an ideal setup for the situation we find ourselves in now, which is having to limit contact. We're already set up to be islands that support each other.
Yeah, and obviously for what's happening this fall, your example is probably an extreme one, but something you guys have done for a long time is it's oftentimes cross country. There's an event in California and you have somebody in Pennsylvania calling it. But I think there's some lessons that can be taken from, if you've got your states limiting the amount of people that can be in a confined space around one area, you can have an announcer be in your office. They could be somewhere else, especially on campus with NDI. It makes it a little of a cleaner potential possibility. You're not having to upload the video to our system and bring it back down. Being able to kind of share that feed over the network and make that happen. Especially, we've seen a lot of talk about in the SID community, how you space people out at a sporting event, how you space your table staff out to meet state requirements, how you're used to needing to jam pack as many people in one space as possible. And I think the ability to take this position specifically of a broadcaster and move it away is something that's applicable to everybody. So I guess from a training standpoint, obviously we've done some trainings, and we've had people come in and we kind of do some advanced technique training that I've actually come out for once myself. But in terms of when you've got a new person and they're trying to learn how to do play-by-play from a video, do you see that there's a transition period that they have in terms of being able to understand that they're having to look with what the camera wants them to see versus using their own eyes to dictate what's said during the event?
Yeah, there's definitely a learning curve there. And that's any kind of announcing, I think. It's a bit of an art, and practice always makes practice and experience always improves. But there is definitely a difference between being on the pool deck calling the action and, you're limited to what the camera is showing you. If you want to double check the score, you can't just turn your head and see the scoreboard. So, I mean, what I've started to set up as a practice for new announcers or, new to this type of announcing is we'll take a clean feed that we have recorded from the pool, and I can stream that to them, and they can do a dry run without any consequences. It's live to them, but it's not necessarily going out anywhere, and we can record that so we can then show that to them. They can listen to it, they can see and get some feedback. And so it's a really good kind of sandbox to be able to train and practice. We have the advantage of we have a lot of banked streams because we've been doing this for a couple years now. So we have a lot of content, but I mean, the same could be said for, you could call a practice as a, if somebody's, whatever sport it may be, set up your equipment, do a dry run, make sure all your equipment's working, and, let your announcer try it out and see. And, there's going to be some growing pains probably along the way. It may not be perfect, but if you've done much production, you realize that it never really gets perfect, and you're always just striving to get better and better and better. So, rather than focusing on what things may have been imperfect or not as good as you would like them, focus on what you can do to improve for the next time and what lessons you can learn along the way.
Now, in terms of the camera operator functionality that you guys are providing, and obviously you've got freelancer or somebody involved in the tournament itself, getting hired and running it. Are there things specific to the situation that you instruct the camera operators to do? Do you want them panning over to the scoreboard more? Do you want them keeping a wider shot in case they miss anything, based on the fact that you don't really have other options to direct them in real time? Are there any tricks and tips related to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Water polo is a little tricky because either people are familiar with water polo or they have no idea about it. And, versus if you're doing football or basketball or, you can look at the style of camera work that's done in those sports. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of research you can do on how it's shot. For water polo, I mean, I have a small instructional video that I send out to the camera operators that I hope they watch, and just give them some general pointers. But they're kind of a lot of our camera operators end up being water polo players that we hire, so they're familiar with the sport, but they may not be necessarily familiar with camera operating. Our kits are pretty easy to operate, but there's still some general things, You want to make sure your tripod is level and the pool is not at a 20-degree tilt, and you want to follow the action. For us, a big challenge is moving water on camera, especially on a stream. It pixelates pretty quickly, and it's kind of hard to follow. If you get in too close, on a player, you can't see the overall action of what's going on with the game. If you're too wide, you just have a bunch of little dots out in the pool. So you kind of have to thread that needle. And, generally, like I said, we have an instructional video that I send out that has those pointers and kind of tips of keep it at basically a medium. You generally want to keep the goal in the shot. So if somebody fires a quick shot, you didn't miss it. And then we try and set up a hero shot after a goal. That helps, one, to feature the player, but also it helps the announcer to be able to see that cap number, to be able to say who it was that got the goal, and helps them announce. But then, be able to pull back out and establish the shot again, because, as you said, they only see, not only does the announcer only see, but people watching only see what you show them. And then, in addition, anytime there's a kind of break in the game, whether it's a timeout or a period break, whatever it may be, generally tell them to pan over to the scoreboard, show us the score, just to double check. Because sometimes it's hard to tell if you're not there at the pool. There's a lot of whistles. Maybe a goal got in the goal, but it didn't count. So, that gives you a good touch point to be able to check your score is correct with what they're showing, and just, a good touch point. And those are the basics. And, you kind of learn some things as you go along. But if it's, like I said, water polo is water polo. If you know it, you know it. If you don't, you're really probably confused by a lot of it. Versus a lot of other sports, it's probably a little easier to get a model for how you want to shoot it. You could look at the NBA, or you look at the NFL, or granted, you're not going to have the 18 cameras that they're going to have, but a lot of that, you look at it and they're primarily following the action with one camera anyway, one camera at a time, for sure. But it's without the need for 18 different cameras for replay. You can really streamline it and still have a really good quality production with pretty small resources, honestly.
Now, we mentioned that the CWPA has been doing this program for a while. You kind of come from a slightly different background, and you've done a lot of things. You've obviously done the sports side of your career, but you also spent some time in television production. Was there anything that you took away from television production that you brought into the sports environment in terms of shooting or teaching people how to shoot that would be helpful, just as general thoughts for those that are looking to increase their production capabilities that are listening in on this call?
Well, it's kind of hard to say. I mean, always experiences always carry over one way or another. You may not always be able to place your finger on exactly what it is. One of the largest thing that I think about from television and film production is for our commercial, our sponsor spots that we're producing, is just to pay more attention to lighting. In a sporting event, you may not necessarily have control over it unless it's already lit for television, which is great. But just to always bring a lighting concern in and an audio concern in, so that you're paying attention to all the different things, and not to put down sports production at all. That's my background, is to try and touch base on every single thing along the way. You've got picture, great. Is it bright enough? Is it too bright? You've got sound from the pool, great. Is that too much sound from the pool? Is it drowning out your announcer? Are the pool whistles louder than your announcer is? And to make sure that you take that time to check it, and also to empower the people who are actually running it to then have ownership of it. So if your announcer, because our announcers are basically producers as well, because they're we kind of set them up and let them run, because there's not a lot of room for interference there. So make sure that they know how to adjust the audio, that they know how to double check the feed, and if it drops out, that they know how to reestablish it. Just that, I guess, kind of just a support structure for it, so that live sports is live sports. If something goes wrong, it's live, and it's not if, it's when. But a lot of television and film production, there's the opportunity of back to one, let's reset and do it again, and you lose that. But by the same token, on a large, television or film set, every time you go back to one, that could cost you tens of thousands of dollars. So, you get it right the first time, you don't have to worry about it the second time. And just carrying that through to, whatever preparation you can do to plan for whatever problems may arise. Always have a contingency plan, and always have a backup. And, and you'll try and think of everything that you can, and then something else will go wrong, and then make that part of your plan for the next time. Was that what you were looking for? Is that?
Yeah, exactly. And one anecdote I'll share, you mentioned lighting, and I think lighting with water polo at the college level is the major thing, because you've got indoor and outdoor venues. You have outdoor venues where you're going to be looking directly into the sun for half the day at some of these venues. You have indoor facilities with no lighting whatsoever, and you look at the camera feed and you're wondering how it's light enough inside for the players to actually see each other. And then there are certain venues, I'm not going to name them by name, but there's a certain one I'm thinking of that's an indoor venue with an entire glass wall that you get both elements.
There's
of
a few of
dark
those.
corners, yeah, dark corners, and then just bright sun. So I think adaptability is kind of the big thing for what you guys do and how you run your productions. And I think that's where we're come to turn this back around to the fall and the remote production aspect of it. I think adaptability is kind of the name of the game for all of us right now, and trying to figure out how these sporting events are going to run. So if anybody was looking to make a key equipment purchase, maybe, they're at the end of their budget cycle this year, and maybe they're one of the lucky few that actually have some money to spend for this coming year, and they're looking to do remote production. What do you think's the most important piece of your guys' setup that you would recommend they start to look at?
Well, that's hard to say, because the crazy thing is that cameras and encoders have gotten so much better and more affordable over the last decade. So, I mean, those are some key things, and you can spend as much money as you want to on either one of those, or you can, there's budget options as well, and trying to balance that. One of the advantages of newer cameras is that they tend to have a lot better light sensitivity. It's gotten a lot better. But, it's hard to say, spend $5,000 on a camera so our remote stream kits, I think the cameras are $300 or less, because that was the best tool for what we use it for. And for our setup, lighting is tricky. We're not gonna send a light out that's big enough to light a whole pool. But this is a little bit of a tangent, but you were talking about adaptability. One of the things to think about adaptability wise is if you're looking at doing a remote stream of something, always remember that if you have a camera, you can put it wherever you need to put it within reason. You don't have to put it in the bleachers where attendees would be sitting if they were coming. If there's lighting problems, you've got the sunset, or you can, if you have morning light in the morning coming from one side, it's going to kill you for the production, and then evening light for the other. You could move it as long as you address it as long as you plan for that and everything else. So to be able to think outside the box and not just say, well, this is where somebody would be sitting, so this is where the camera goes, but what works best for the camera, what works best for the stream. Now, that tangent aside, equipment-wise, I mean, I'm a camera and audio guy. JD, you mentioned you're a video guy for sure. It's always good to have all the toys at your disposal, but it always comes down to a budget line. There's always that concern of where do you spend your money, and I mean, the first step is to get a camera that works for what you need it to. There's a whole broad range and a whole different, whether it's chipsets that work better for water. There's a lot of research that can be done, but there's also a lot of experts that can help advise you on those things. And my personal crusade on a lot of these things is audio, because I have a background doing audio work, and the problem with audio is the only time anybody notices audio is if it's bad. So in a perfect world, a sound guy never gets noticed because he's doing his job and his or her job, and it sounds good and nobody notices it. So, I mean, whether it's having a good microphone that will help it sound more like they're there and have better control over making sure it doesn't blow out and overmodulate when you have loud, but also can pick up some of the lower, whatever it may be. So, I mean, those are the things that often drop off a list first is audio, and whether it's a microphone or it's a mixer or, some tool that allows the announcer producer to better produce, to have a control surface rather than having to use a mouse and click software. It's those things to think about. You have to build your bones first, and that's camera, encoder, software, hardware to run that software, and then you can start filling in the gaps and improving, incremental improvement. So that probably wasn't a very specific answer, because there's a lot of broad range in that. But And if you're going to do any kind of production of spots or anything like that, you know, you can get some decent lighting that will change the whole look of your production for not that much money.
Yeah, and maybe touch on that a little bit, because I think that's something that athletic departments in this downtime can try to figure out with their sponsors is you guys actually film your own spots for your sponsors,
Right.
and you fill other content as well. I mean, some of it is longer form content to run during games, tips, instructional videos. I know my buddy Brad Schumacher's on a lot of them. Just kind of give us an idea of what it takes to do that, and what type of time commitment you give to that, and see if hopefully somebody out of this can say, hey, that's an idea for something we can do with our one of our local mom and pop shops, that hey, we've got this downtime, we have this equipment, let's do a spot and try to help them.
So this is actually probably where I bring the biggest influence from my film and television work to, is produce spots. That is more along the style of film and television production. So, rather than just throw up a green screen, throw somebody in front of it, software has gotten a lot better. So it's much easier to key out a green screen, even if it's not perfectly lit. It's not. We're past the days where it's got to be, perfectly lit evenly. You can do a lot with post tools, but that being said, it is certainly a lot easier to fix it in post if you don't have to fix it in post. So, that having a plan for what you're going to do, pre-production is key. I'm currently trying to organize the time to do our next sponsor spot shoot, but to have a plan of what you're going to shoot before, and make sure you have a reasonable time plan for capturing it all, because it's always going to take longer than you think it is. And then make sure you have the equipment. Like, that's some of the key purchases I've made since coming on to the CWPA is some lighting. That it actually is a nice bonus, because what we're also looking at doing is incorporating more social media content and more integrated experience with our games that we're streaming, whether it's a remote stream or if it's our championship production, which is a larger multi-cam replay, a much more involved production. But if I have a basic interview lighting setup, I can set up a green screen or light a small set to have an interview with somebody, to have a product spot to show the product very pretty, or to talk about a new initiative we have, whatever it may be. I've got those tools now, and then they also double as mobile production, so that we can take it with us when we go on the road to do a championship, and we can start doing our sideline interviews after the game. Say we have a player of the game interview, we can have a little lighting set up on a step and repeat backdrop where we bring them over there, and then what we're looking at doing is taking that directly to social media, so that then that can help feed traffic into the actual game itself. But it's having those tools that kind of make that difference of, we just grabbed it's somebody's cell phone footage, which there's nothing wrong with that if that works. But if you can get that produced look to really elevate, the production value of all of it, and just get that out on social media, because you're properly lit, you've got good audio, you have a mic there ready, so they just have to walk in, grab a 5-minute interview or less, a 1-minute interview, and then turn around and get that on social media, and then promote the game that you're streaming next, or that you just streamed, or whatever. You can then integrate it across multiple platforms, and then hopefully it all gets better, and then next round you can get some more tools to fill in some more gaps, and then incremental improvement is always the goal, I think.
Yeah, and hopefully they get really good at those 2-minute and 19-second interviews that you can post on Twitter. Can't be 220, can't be extra frames, 219 or under. So as a reminder, guys, if you have any questions, we have the Q&A button open, and we're happy to take some questions at this time. And we talked about video toys and tools, and one of the guys that I know that loves experimenting and thinking outside the box is Chris Sabato at Willamette, and he's got a question here talking about communication between the remote site and your producers if there's a problem. He asked if you guys use a remote comms system. I think at this point it's still a little more telephone based when you need things done.
For our remote production, we don't have a remote comm system. It's just we make sure that we have cell phones and we can generally text because we're not always able to get on the phone, but that we have that access. In a perfect world, yeah, it'd be great to be able to have comm and call a shot and be able to tell the camera operator, hey, grab this, grab that. We're just not at that level of, we can't justify that. Some weekends we're doing 8 different locations in a weekend, so that's a lot of gear, and that's a lot of that would move more towards you would need a separate producer director to call that as well. And we're not quite at that staffing level. We do use comms for our championship production, but that's local, just standard comms, and it's very helpful. But we pretty much kind of go on the model of empower them with the idea of what you want, kind of the general style of camera operation that you're looking for, and then just hey, can you do this, and just kind of give them some information along the way. And it's about trying to preload that as much as you can. So you've established this before the event. We don't always have we always try and do a test to make sure everything's working before the event, but sometimes that doesn't even work out. Such is the nature of live production, but if you can do that front-loaded work and empower people with the right education and stuff, then in a perfect world it runs itself, and then you have cell phone communications for either little nudges of instruction or just if a problem arises to troubleshoot. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. And the other thing I'll add is for Chris is, obviously with remote comms, you can get some very convoluted setups going that will work with your local comms and so on and so forth. But maybe as a starting point, if you need to have locational communication, using a free service like Discord might be a good starting point to see if you really are getting value of it before you make any sort of investment. So I would say, that's probably a good starting point, if anything. Next question is from David Warren. Do you have a basic startup cost estimate? Just a ballpark is fine. I think we'll tag team this one a little bit, Justin. I'll say one of the things you mentioned earlier is cameras are so arbitrary at this point. Is any camera can get a feed out and get something video-wise down the line. It's how much you want to spend there. So you can start at a very consumer level point, and you can go all the way up to red cameras and do ridiculous things. So I think, camera, what I always say, and I'd love to get your feedback on this, is I always like to say if you've got a set budget, I'd like to try to spend as much money on the camera as possible, if that makes sense, because that's going to be a better quality viewing experience for the fans, but it's also probably something that's a little more well-built and might last you a little bit longer as well.
Absolutely. I think money spent, you can certainly overspend on a camera, but in my opinion, there are worse ways to overspend money. But to add to that, there's also the not fun things that are also a requirement as well. Like to have a good tripod, back when I was doing freelance work, you never get paid for your tripod, but you really got to have it. And tripods are expensive to get a good one. And you don't have to go, you could spend $5,000 on a tripod, and if it's a real TV, if it's a full TV setup, you may already have some of that equipment, but to make sure that you at least have the functionality in the tripod that you need, so you don't end up with a photo tripod that the only way that you can pan it is to completely unlock the head, and you go to turn to pan left, and all of a sudden the whole thing flops down. So just make sure that you spend the money where you need to. Specifically on our kits, because we ship them across the country, legitimately the most expensive thing in our kit is the Pelican case they go in. And it's worth it But I think the final just ballpark for the kit is, I believe it's $1,200 ballpark to get a camera, encoder, tripod, Pelican case, cables, extra cables, and the packing to keep it all safe, when it's being thrown around in the back of the truck. So that's for the kit, and almost a significant portion of that is the case. So if you're not shipping it, you can knock a couple $100 off that. Now, whether or not that kit would be perfect for all the things that you're doing, it depends on what you're doing. Getting the right tools for the job is always key. But in addition to that, then you need software to allow you to stream. There's a lot of options out there, and everything's moving more towards a subscription base, which helps kind of lower that initial cost, but it is a continuing cost. But most of those softwares, there's at least a trial period that you could run it and try things out before you make that initial investment, and make sure that your whatever hardware you're running it on can run it and run it well. So I would think full startup from nothing, including not even having a computer. I honestly, I think $3,000 to $5,000 would get you going, and probably a little less than that. And there's also a lot of things, if you have any piece along the way, including a computer that will run the software, then that's just knocking money off of that. And for some people, that's a lot of money, and for some people, that's not. And it just depends on the setting.
Yeah, a couple throw-ins. Tripod-wise, there's a company I really like that does some good value fluid head tripods. Magnus, the VT300's an $80 product. That's what I have my camera on here. What I recommend, and if you guys have ever got equipment recommendations through me, the Magnus VT4000 is $160. If you're not using it every single day, you're using it for your sporting events, it will last you, and you'll think it's Manfrotto or something a lot more expensive. Really good fluid head. Audio-wise, Audio-Technica BPHS-1. This is a $199 headset. These last forever as long as you take care of them. This one is about 7 years old, and you could not guess it because I take care of it, and it works really well. Audio equipment wise, you can be out the door, $270 or so, get a little either interface or a mixer, a USB mixer to plug into your computer. The software costs are obviously there depending on what you want to do. We're adding the Rtmp and RTSP ingest to StretchCast for this fall, if that's something you want to do. But obviously Wirecast has these capabilities, vMix has these capabilities as well. So you and obviously OBS has them as well. You've got to do some plugins and add a few things if you need to. But lots of different directions you can go there. And I think that brings us to the next question, Casey Brooks. Do you bring in the live feed from the pool as a direct Rtmp web stream source on Wirecast? Yes, with one step in between that. The pool feed gets sent to us as the streaming provider, and then we give them the correct URL to pull it down. And that's how they do it. And obviously, since you're doing multiple pools and everything, you've got to have a lot of planning involved with that. And I think that's helpful if anybody's wanting to do this and doing multiple events, to make sure you've got a plan in place, because you're basically producing 4 streams at once, and you need to make sure all of them are going to the right place.
Right. So that's so we just bring it in as an Rtmp. To us, we just have the URL like JD said, and it just comes in as an Rtmp. In a perfect world, if you can be in the same venue and take out that stream step, and just whether it's running a long cable to wherever, or NDI is a good option if you can do that, because then you kind of can take out that one level of encoding compression step, and that makes a big difference. But yeah, it's actually pretty robust. So yeah, we just bring it in as a stream, and then add our graphics, add our announcing, and to touch base on what we use for announcer mics, which I'm working on getting the budget to upgrade, is I think they're $80 Yamaha headsets, and a very small USB adapter that I think is $40 or something,
Yeah.
maybe less, and it's just plug it in and go, and it works. It absolutely works. They don't last 7 years and look pristine, but for getting started and figuring out some of the kinks along the way, you can knock those budget dollars down and stretch them out in a lot of different ways.
If I had prepared more, I have one of those. I could have had it here, but
Yeah, me too.
I'm looking around like, eh. Okay, next question, and this is a tougher one. And apologize if I butcher your last name here, but Mark Jogord. This is a possible camera-related question. We shoot from an overhead press box that has some netting in front of it from the softball backstop that can't really be adjusted. We sometimes get complaints from viewers about looking through the netting. Do you have any suggestions to make the video view better? I think what isn't an option is moving the camera from the press box. Any suggestions? I'll take a stab at it first and say focal length is going to be your key here. So the better and more adjustable the focal length on the camera is, you can play some tricks to get around that. But and really, unfortunately, you're really only going to see that as you step up and upgrade your cameras. Anything you want to add on that point, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of some variables in that. If the netting is close to the camera, it's better, because then you can your depth of field, you can play with that a little bit more easily, and not, because if you get too shallow depth, then you're going to have whatever the pitcher's in focus, but the batter's out. Yeah, I mean, that is going to be a higher end. If you can't move the camera, if you can actually bring the net closer to the camera in any way, or get the camera as close to the net as you can, without hopefully getting a softball to the lens, that'll help. Yeah, because if you need a wide field, you can't really shoot. You can't shoot through the hole necessarily. Yeah, I mean, like you said, depth of field is going to be your best bet, and it may cause a little bit of a haze on it, but a haze will be better than strings.
Adam Haley, what is the communication between the director, producer, and the on-air talent for commercial breaks? Do you use cell phones for time updates on break times? The producer's controlling all of that, so.
Yeah, so with us, basically, our announcers are our producers. So they have control of when to run the spots, and the nice thing is that they can still continue to watch the feed from the pool. So if they start coming back early or something, they can just switch back. So that kind of cuts out one loop. And because we're pretty bare bones communication wise, just from necessity on a lot of this stuff. So generally, unless the camera operator reaches out with information, they have to stay on their toes and keep an eye on that feed. But because they are basically the producer as well, with ideally we've prepped them with the spots to run, roughly when to run them, how many times to run them, and set them up with graphics and different breaks. But they're the ones in control. So if they want to run an ad, they run the ad. And if it needs to come back sooner, they just can cut. They have the ability to immediately cut away without any step in between. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. Any last second questions? Now's kind of the time to put them in. But without seeing any more come across here, unless they come in the next few seconds, any final thoughts, Justin, for the audience in terms of remote production and just in general to summarize today? Well,
I mean, I do think that we're in a pretty great time to start remote production. I mean, as many challenges as we may be facing right now, at least this is not an insurmountable thing if you want to start doing a remote production. If you need to start a remote production, you can do it, and there's a lot of resources available. The price tag has come down significantly, and just the main thing is that if your first round of remote streaming is not perfect, join the club. That's going to happen to everybody. You can do a lot of things to make it as good as you can, but know that there's always going to be a learning curve. and figure out what works, what doesn't work, and look for resources to help you figure those out before you get started. And think as much as you can about planning everything out beforehand. So as much as you can front load everything and pre-produce as much as you can, think through different things that could go wrong and have a plan for it. That'll solve most of your problems before you get them.
Yeah, no, good thoughts. And Justin, really appreciate your time today. Last thing I'll say here is if anybody has any questions or wants any help with equipment recommendations related to remote setups or anything, feel free to reach out to me, JD at Prestosports.com. I'll help you guys get set up no matter what the budget is. We'll figure out a way to make it work. And if you're looking at, scenarios for the fall, I've already started going through kind of a couple basic setups that we can do if you need to move announcers or other things off site, if you need to move camera operation off site. I mean, there's some things we can do with PTZ cameras and actually control them a little bit off site. We don't want to make huge adjustments where we're panning back and forth the entire court, but there's some things that we can do to help bring the number of bodies needed for production down. And as Justin mentioned earlier in the call, I mean, technology the price point's getting lower and lower. So some of these things that may not have been possible for your school 2 or 3 years ago now might fit your budget. So appreciate everybody's time today on this Presto Sports webinar. I hope it was a good one for you, and we'll be back with the next one in a couple weeks. Until then, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for having me.